Well, after more than a decade, one of aviation's greatest mysteries could soon be solved, with a new search commencing for MH370 off the coast of WA.
Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 and accident.
There are stories the ocean keeps to itself for years, locked beneath cold currents and crushing pressure, waiting for the world to be ready. The disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 on March 8, 2014, is one of those stories. For more than a decade, governments deployed satellites, engineers ran complex algorithms, and naval fleets dragged the farthest corners of the Indian Ocean, all in pursuit of a plane that had seemingly erased itself from the face of the Earth. But while billion-dollar technology was chasing digital shadows, a group of quiet, ordinary men were sitting on their fishing boats with something far more powerful than any algorithm. They had their own eyes. And what those eyes witnessed on that dark, fateful morning has now broken through 12 years of institutional silence to shake the world to its core. The story of MH370 has always been told from the top down. It has been told by engineers in climate-controlled offices, by investigators who speak in frequencies and arcs, and by officials who carefully measure every word before it leaves their lips. Very rarely has anyone asked the people at the bottom, the fishermen, the coast dwellers, the men who rise before the sun and spend their lives reading the sea the way most people read a newspaper. These men do not deal in theories. They do not speculate about Doppler shifts or satellite geometry. They deal in physical reality. What they saw with their own eyes, smelled with their own lungs, and felt vibrating through the hulls of their wooden boats is a kind of testimony that no computer model can manufacture or dismiss. And now, after years of being ignored, patronized, and forgotten, their accounts are finally colliding with hard science. And the collision is nothing short of explosive. To understand why these fishermen matter so deeply, you first have to understand what happened in the hours before the world even knew something was wrong. Flight MH370 departed Kuala Lumpur International Airport just after midnight on March 8, 2014, bound for Beijing. There were 239 people on board. Passengers from over a dozen nations, a crew of experienced professionals, and a captain with more than 18,000 hours of flying experience behind him. The Boeing 777 was not just any aircraft. It was one of the most sophisticated flying machines ever built, engineered with layers of redundancy, packed with safety systems, and capable of practically flying itself across the globe. By every measure, this was supposed to be a routine, forgettable overnight flight. It was the kind of flight that lands quietly and empties into an airport terminal without anyone writing a single word about it. Instead, it became the greatest aviation mystery in human history. At 1:19 in the morning, the flight crew exchanged a final calm sign-off with air traffic control. "Good night, Malaysian 370. Those 5 words were the last human transmission from the aircraft. Within minutes, the plane's transponder, the device that broadcasts its identity, altitude, and position to air traffic control systems, went dark. Not because of a malfunction. Not because of an electrical failure. It was switched off. In an instant, a 200-ton commercial airliner carrying 239 people became invisible to the modern world's entire radar network. What followed was a series of calculated, deliberate maneuvers that turned the aircraft into something aviation professionals still struggle to describe. Turned back. It crossed the Malay Peninsula flying at low altitude, hugging the boundary between two countries' radar zones in a way that minimized its chances of detection. Then it banked south, heading deep into the emptiness of the Indian Ocean, and it simply flew, silently, invisibly, for nearly 7 more hours. It is in those 7 hours, particularly in the early ones, that the fishermen enter the story. And their accounts, taken individually, might be easy to set aside. But taken together, with the geographic consistency and the almost eerily matching details, they form a picture that is very difficult to ignore. The most vivid and haunting of these testimonies came from the waters of the Malacca Strait, one of the busiest and most closely watched stretches of sea in the entire Indo-Pacific region. An Indonesian fisherman named Rusli Kuzman had been out on the water since before dawn that morning. He was not thinking about aircraft or headlines. He was thinking about his nets. Then the air changed. Not with sound. Not with the roaring thunder of jet engines you might expect, but with a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to pass through the water itself and up through the bones of his boat. He looked up and what he saw stopped him completely. The aircraft was low. Dangerously, impossibly low for a commercial airliner. It was not cruising. It was not climbing. It was descending in a way that Kuzmin, who had watched planes cross his sky for decades, had never seen before. He described it moving with a slow, rhythmic sway, dipping its wings from side to side like a kite that has lost the wind, like something enormous trying desperately to stay balanced against a force it could not overcome. There was no smoke trail across the sky. There was no fireball. There was no explosion. There was just this massive, ghostly shape cutting through the morning haze in near silence, gliding with the terrible inevitability of something that has already accepted its fate. And then it met the water. Kuzmin said the sea did not so much crash against the plane as swallow it. One moment the aircraft was there. The next, the surface was settling back into itself, broken only by a spreading dark stain and the acrid chemical smell of aviation fuel burning somewhere beneath the surface. He marked his GPS coordinates. He waited for someone to call him. The call never came. Miles away, other fishing crews in the coastal waters near Port Dickson in Malaysia were experiencing something remarkably similar. Boats whose crews had been resting in the pre-dawn quiet reported a sound that they compared to a rolling thunderclap, except that the sky was clear. They said it traveled through the water before it traveled through the air, which is the signature of something large impacting the ocean surface at speed. One group reported seeing what appeared to be a life raft floating partially submerged near the surface, weathered and deflated, with markings still faintly visible on its side. That detail would later take on enormous significance. In the frantic early days of the search, when authorities were still assuming the plane had gone down somewhere in the South China Sea, these reports from fishermen along the Malacca Strait were catalogued and then quietly shelved. The search moved south. The witnesses were left behind. Then there is the account from Australian waters that may be the most staggering of all. A veteran deep-sea trawler captain named Kit Olver was operating his vessel, the Vivian Jane, in the deep waters off the southern coast of Australia in late 2014. Olver had spent his entire working life on the ocean and held a private pilot's license, giving him a practical understanding of aircraft structures that most fishermen would not possess. On a routine trawl, his nets snagged on something at depth. This was not unusual. Nets catch on rocks, on reefs, on the scattered remains of old shipping wrecks. But Olver said immediately that this was different. The weight was wrong. The resistance was wrong. As his crew worked the winches and strained the equipment to its mechanical limits, something enormous began to rise from the deep. What broke the surface was white, curved, and immense. Olver stood on the pitching deck of his trawler and stared at a structure he recognized immediately, not from experience with underwater debris, but from his understanding of how large aircraft are built. It was a wing section. Not a fragment, not a panel, but a wing section large enough to begin pulling the Vivian Jane sideways in the water, threatening to drag the vessel down before the crew could react. They cut the nets and watched their find disappear back into the darkness, taking $20,000 of equipment with it. Olver reported the incident to the Australian Maritime Safety Authority. He was told it was probably a lost cargo container. He has not stopped talking about it since. For years, these accounts existed in a kind of parallel universe to the official investigation. The official story was built on satellite data, specifically on the 7 famous handshake signals exchanged between the aircraft's satellite communications unit and an Inmarsat satellite stationed over the Indian Ocean. These pings did not carry navigational data or voice transmissions. They were the electronic equivalent of a heartbeat, a simple "I am still here," sent once per hour by automated systems that had no idea the plane had vanished. By analyzing the timing of these signals and the subtle frequency shifts caused by the aircraft's movement, investigators were able to conclude that the plane had flown south and ended its journey somewhere along a sweeping curve of ocean known as the Seventh Arc. Searches began. Enormous areas of the southern Indian Ocean were mapped and scoured. Nothing was found. The tension between the satellite data pointing south and the fishermen's accounts pointing closer to home became one of the most quietly divisive arguments in the entire investigation. On one side sat the mathematics, the cold, elegant geometry of orbital mechanics and radiophysics. On the other side sat human memory. Imperfect, emotional, unverifiable, and stubbornly consistent. The families of the 239 victims found themselves caught in the middle, clinging to each new development while bracing for the inevitable disappointment. Every anniversary brought fresh pain. Every search season that ended without a discovery carved the grief a little deeper. The fragments that did wash ashore, a flaperon found on Réunion Island in 2015, stabilizer pieces recovered from the beaches of Mozambique and Madagascar, confirmed only that the plane had broken apart somewhere in the Indian Ocean. They confirmed a crash. They did not explain a cause. They did not give the families what they needed most, which was not a piece of wing, but an answer. What has changed everything heading into 2026 is a technology that nobody in aviation was thinking about on the night MH370 disappeared. Weak Signal Propagation Reporter, known by the acronym WHISPER, is a global network of low-power amateur radio transmissions that circles the Earth like an invisible web. These signals are not designed for aircraft tracking. They were built by radio hobbyists to test the boundaries of long-distance communication. But when a large metal object, such as a commercial airliner, passes through one of these signals, it creates a tiny, measurable disturbance. For years, those disturbances were considered atmospheric noise. Then a group of researchers, led by aerospace engineer Richard Godfrey and supported by statisticians at the University of Liverpool, began the painstaking process of mining years of archived WHISPER data to see if the ghost of MH370 had left traces in the radio fabric of the planet. What they found has rewritten the conversation entirely. The WHISPER analysis does not just place the aircraft somewhere in the Indian Ocean. It tracks the flight with a level of granularity that the satellite pings alone could never achieve. It reveals a flight path with specific turns, with periods that suggest the aircraft may have been flown in deliberate holding patterns, wide circles over the open water, as though whoever was at the controls was pausing, deciding, or waiting. Most critically, the WHISPER data places the trajectory of the aircraft in alignment with zones that local witnesses had been pointing to since 2014. The convergence is not perfect. No convergence in a mystery of this scale ever is. But it is close enough and specific enough to demand serious attention. Early in 2026, Malaysian authorities received a detailed technical report synthesizing the WHISPER tracking with new satellite imaging data, identifying a high-probability impact zone approximately 1,000 miles north of where most search efforts had been concentrated, a location that sits within a sonar blind spot that has never been properly examined. In March 2026, Ocean Infinity concluded its latest search phase, deploying autonomous underwater vehicles to scour an additional 15,000 square kilometers of seabed. The technology used was extraordinary. Robots capable of descending to 6,000 meters, equipped with sonar systems of a precision that did not exist a decade ago. The result was the same as every previous search. Nothing confirmed. The plane has not been found. But what has changed is the quality of the silence. Every section of cleared seabed narrows the remaining possibilities. Every blank area crossed off the map is not a failure but an elimination. The mathematics of absence are slowly becoming the mathematics of location. The researchers who follow the WHISPER data believe that the precision now available to searchers is sufficient to make discovery not just possible but inevitable, provided the will and the funding align. For the families, that alignment cannot come soon enough. At the 12th anniversary ceremony in Kuala Lumpur in March 2026, the grief was as raw as it has ever been. People like Grace Nathan, who lost her mother on that flight, have spent 12 years in a kind of suspended grief, unable to mourn completely because there is no confirmed place to mourn toward. Families of Chinese passengers, who represent the largest single national group among the 239 victims, wrote an open letter to Malaysia's Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, acknowledging the technical realities but demanding that the search continue. They asked for the no-find, no-fee contract with Ocean Infinity to be extended beyond its June 2026 expiration, and called for other deep-sea search companies to be invited to take their turn. For them, this is not a budget question or a geopolitical calculation. It is a question of basic human dignity. What the Fisherman's story ultimately teaches us is something profound about how we process truth. We live in an age that trusts data above all else. We believe in satellites and algorithms and computational models. And we distrust the imprecise, unverifiable testimony of ordinary people who were simply in the right place at the wrong time. The investigation into MH370 spent years treating the Fisherman as background noise, well-meaning but unreliable, useful perhaps as color for a documentary but not as actionable intelligence for a search operation. The whisper revolution has forced a reckoning with that dismissal. It has shown that the men on the water were not confused, were not misremembering, were not describing something other than what they said they saw. They were describing a large aircraft in distress, descending in a controlled but failing glide toward the ocean surface, in a location and at a time that now aligns with the most sophisticated radio science analysis ever applied to this mystery. The truth about MH370 is no longer entirely hidden. It is emerging slowly and painfully from the intersection of human memory and scientific data, from the place where a salt-weathered fisherman's coordinates meet a radio engineer's spectral graph. The plane did not simply fall out of the sky in a random spiral. The evidence increasingly points to a final descent that was deliberate, controlled, and designed to send the aircraft to the deepest possible part of the ocean. Whether that act was one of tragedy, desperation, or something darker is a question the black boxes will answer when they are finally recovered. And they will be recovered. The technology exists. The data is narrowing the search zone with every passing month. The world has waited 12 years for the cameras of an autonomous submarine to descend through the black water of the Wharton Basin and come to rest on the tail of a Malaysia Airlines jet. That moment is coming. It may not come this year. It may not come in the next. But the ocean does not keep its secrets forever, and the fishermen who watched that giant fall from the sky have waited long enough to be believed.